Okay, so I want you all to take this time to be thinking about who committed the deviation, what is the deviation, when did it happen, and then we're gonna get, I think it's five of you all, so we're gonna get three on that. One person do the who, one person do the what, one person do the when, and then the other two people are going to do the corrective preventative action. So we have two people with the same first name. I'm gonna let you all kind of write. I guess you can write in the chat what you think, why this happened, what can they do preventative, and what action should take place. And then the other three can work together to figure out the who, what, and when in the chat. And I'm gonna be right back. Okay, so far as the who, we want to start this protocol and deviation. How do you think we should write it? Who committed the deviation?
It's the PI.
Was it the PI or was it the study coordinator?
The PI.
PI.
We're going to read the last part again of this scenario. The PI explained the safety updates to the grandmother and child. The grandmother signed the consent form, and the study coordinator proceeded with the visits. Okay, so the PI. So the PI conducted informed consent process. And so we're going to start it off with CRA reviewed the informed consent of participant to during visit month 4 and noted the PI conducted the informed consent process with the minor participant and a non-parent or legally authorized representative. Okay. So this is what we noted. PI. Doctor. Okay, what? So what happened?
He let the minor's grandmother sign the ICF instead of legally authorized representative.
Okay, and what do we need to put in the when spot?
During the reconsent process, the PI let the grandmother sign the informed consent process.
Okay, so the when is going to be related to that visit. So when we're documenting, we need to attach it to that visit. So it happened during visit month 4. So that was the title of that visit. Now, we didn't capture a date, but if a date was captured in the scenario, so we're just going to give an arbitrary date, we can do today's date. So when you completed a deviation, you need to say, if applicable, what visit that it happened and what was the date that it happened. So we're just going to say June 12th, 2025. Okay. Okay, so why do we think it happened? That's not really up to us. This is what the site will document because they need to come up with corrective measures, present preventative measures, and actions to help prevent it. So, but now we're going to switch back to the coordinator. So if you were in this situation, how would you word that this happened? How would you word this process happen? I'll start that one off because that might be a little difficult if you never experienced it. So if I was a coordinator, I would say Dr. Hood inadvertently allowed the grandmother to sign, even though she was not the legally authorized representative. And we're gonna add a new slide so we can have more room. Okay, and how will we correct that?
Probably retrain the site and the staff on the
Okay,
process, like how do you do the ICF process, if there were any, I mean, retrain them on the protocol.
okay. So the I see a process will be sufficient enough for this situation. So the CRA retrained the PI and site staff assigned to the ICF task on the importance of ensuring the main consent is signed by the parent or legally authorized representative Grammarly is y'all friend. Helps you correct a little bit more than Microsoft's soft. Okay. Okay. And how will we prevent that in the future? What would you think would be a good way to, if you was to cite writing this, could say that they'll work to prevent this? Oh, somebody, I'm sorry. Somebody, I didn't realize you got out. I brought you back in. So I'm not sure where you left off, but we're writing uh, the corrective, preventative, and action of the protocol deviation. So we're down here on the preventative portion. In the future, the PI has voiced that he or the assigned staff will do what? What would they do to help prevent this from happening again? Can y'all hear me?
Make sure only the legal representative will sign the informed consent form.
Okay. So they can verify parent or legally authorized representative prior to a minor signing consent. So what they can do if if this is a new study coordinator or the PI didn't do the screening ICF process, then they need to go back to that subjects chart because if you have a minor, the site should have taken a copy of the parent's ID and listed the other parent's name and information if either the mom or dad will be bringing that individual to the visits. So they need to look at that documentation, which should be under the subject's demographic section to make sure that, hey, when we're reconsenting, that person information matches what we have in the demographic area. And far as action, we need to find out if this situation is reportable to the IRB. So anytime we have an ICF deviation, the number one action is going to be retraining. So that's our action. The CRA action is to retrain. The site's action is to report to the IRB if applicable. And it's up to both the site and the CRA to know that information because they are responsible for knowing that as it relates to the handbook of the IRB that's approved to overlook this trial. So we're going to go back into presentation mode and go to the next slide.
Dr. Cantress, I'm sorry to interrupt. I have two questions.
Oh, you're not interrupting. Go ahead.
So, a patient, or rather a participant, is allowed to have one legally authorized representative, or how does that work?
Typically, you're only gonna have one legal because that's gonna go through the courts. Now, if you adoptive, it's like an adoption situation. Both the parent, what we might say adoptive parents, might be the legal authorized representative. But typically, that legal authorized representative is one person because that's kind of like having power of attorney over somebody. Or the child might be a ward of a state and they're in the care of a foster parent. Typically, that is governed to one person, but it just depends on the circumstance. So if there are two, then both should be documented in the patient's chart.
Okay, thanks. And my next question is, you said if there's an ICF protocol deviation, we report that to the IRB if applicable. What does that if applicable mean?
Okay, so we're going to get to those two handbooks that I told you about. It's going to be based on their guidance. So if their handbook has a related ICF deviation reportable criteria, we need to know that criteria. So this is why I did two different companies, because you're going to see where one wants you to report things related to the ISF and the other one does not have properly reportable criteria related to the ISF. So
it just depends on what the protocol states for that particular trial.
Not the protocol. It depends on the IRB. So It's going to be a deviation regardless because it's going against the protocol. But whether or not it has to be reported to the IRB is going to be based on the IRB standards.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. So this was solid. So when to report to the informed consent deviation to the IRB. So this will solely depend on the IRB used during the clinical trial. However, the standard times to report to the IRB are when an unauthorized person is conducting an informed consent process. That's typically when the IRB wants to know. The informed consent was not obtained before assessments were done. The IRB typically wants to know that. Reconsent of a subject for safety reasons is required before assessments are completed, and the site did not do that. Biosample or genetic testing is collected without the subject signing the additional biosample or genetic testing consent form. They typically want to do that. I know that. A person other than the parent or legally authorized representative signs the consent on behalf of a minor. They typically want that reported. And I indicated, can you think of any other incidents? But those are pretty much the ones that they want reported. Oh, let me just go back. Things that I've noticed that they don't want reported. So some ICLs have a format of how to do the date. They might have month, date, year, and some might have date, month, year. If the patient or the site did not follow that format for the date, the IRB does not want to know that. They consider that an administrative error. The CRA should just remind the site on how properly to document the date format. They should document that they re-educated the site in their report, and that's all that has to be done for that situation. If the ICF has a place at the bottom or the top for the patient to initial each page in addition to signing at the end, and they missed a page or two, that is not reportable to the IRB. Again, it can be documented in your report, upon reviewing subject 123's ICF signed on date June 2nd, 2023. CRA noted page 5 and 10 was not initial. And that's all you have to do for as your documentation. CRA re-educated the person conducting the informed consent process to make sure that the subject initials each page. So those are examples of things that they don't want reported related to the ISF. Okay, so now you're going to pull those two documents. The WCG, we're going to start at page 16, and the Sterling, we're going to start at page 31. Okay, so on page 16, it was basically talking about the informed consent process. So I just wanted you to physically see where you can find that in a document. So here it is. And they went over those goals that we talked about, what should be within. Okay. I wanted to see how far I needed to go, so go to page 28. Okay. So these are the issues or the questions that we need to consider. So they have that listed. The investigator responsibilities of the informed consent. They have that listed in here. So this I just wanted to show you the things that they have listed. And this is where we talk about that impartial witness. And again, is if the participant or the legally authorized person is unable to read, we need to have that impartial witness. So all of this stuff is basically outlined in the ICF GCP, and it's also it's going to be outlined in the IRB. So we're going to fast forward to 59, and this is where we're going to see that difference. Somebody got a comment. Yes, Kappa retrain the site. Yes. Okay, so that's what I wanted to get to, the IRB reporting requirements. Okay, so they list 1 through 14. And again, this is the WCG or Copernicus. So we're comparing the two. So IRB reporting requirements. When you have to report is going to be based on the IRB. So what do we see the difference here? They have a what day time frame?
Five days.
They have 5 days. But this IRB has
10 days.
10 days. So the reason why that's important, because if you go outside their reporting time frame, that's going to be a ding when the site do their annual resubmission of protocol deviations or anything that has happened negatively on the site, and they then report within that time frame. That's a ding against them. And when an auditor comes in, they're gonna know. They're gonna when they see that you have a protocol deviation that was reportable to the IRB, they're gonna look at that time frame. And so this is why I wanted to show you two different companies, because every company is not the same. They have 10 business days. I want to say it used to say 14 calendar days, 10 business days. That's what we used to hear 2 weeks, because the site that I used to work for, they used WCG all the time. But yeah, I wanted to point that out. And the other thing I wanted to point out is this one does not have anything related to the ISF that they want reported. So it will fall under information where the sponsor requires prompt reporting. So 9 times out of 10, the sponsor always wants you to report deviations related to the informed consent process, but they don't have one specifically outlined for the informed consent. This one did. This one has enrolling a subject without obtaining informed consent or performing tasks on a subject project, the consenting subject, failure to execute the informed consent form as required by the IRB, signatures as required by the IRB, or consenting a subject with the incorrect version of the ISF. So that reconsenting process, if you didn't give that subject that new most recently approved ISF, then they want this reported. So this is why. Okay, yeah, page 31. This is why I wanted to point that out, to show you the difference. So it's up to you as the site, and it's up to us, if we are monitors, to know what are the requirements for reporting deviations as it relates to the IRB. And seeing these two companies, we see that they're all are not the same. Okay. So the takeaways from this training: a process that provides information about the research methods, procedures, and including possible risks or benefits. That's what the informed consent is basically about. We know that there's elements of the informed consent that must be in there. We went over those. You can find those outlined either in the FDA regulations or the ICH GCP guidelines. There's 22 concepts listed in the ICH GCP guidelines. We want to make sure the patient is always free of duress. We want to make sure proper documentation of the process was done, and we want to make sure that includes giving the patient a copy. We want to make sure that all subjects should be reconsented on the most recently approved ICF unless deemed unnecessary by the Institutional Review Board. So let me give you an example of that. If you are on a trial and it's a one-dose medication, and that subject has already received that dose, but based on the protocol, they are still being followed, where it's 6 months, 1 year, 2 months, whatever the situation is. But they're not receiving any more study drug, but a new safety issue has come out. It is possible that the IRB will say only people receiving the study drug needs to sign this new consent. So pretty much only the new patients need to sign this new consent, and the old patients do not. So that is a circumstance where you have a reconsent, but not all patients are required to sign. And a typical drug that's going to be a one and done are vaccines. So if a subject has already gotten a vaccine, but they're just being followed for a period of time to see if they have any symptoms relating to the condition they're trying to prevent, they don't necessarily have to sign that new reconsent form. Now, with that being said, Some sites standard operating practices require that all subjects sign all ICFs. So that in that instance, it's okay that they sign. So doing more never hurts in clinical research. It's typically when we do less. So if the site says, despite the IRB guidance, it is our policy that all patients must sign a new ICF, then they can do so as well. Any questions about that?
No.
Okay. Okay, and then we want to make sure they got a good environment, a nice space. We want to make sure that we explain the things about the trial thoroughly. About this explaining. Now, sometimes the protocol is going to require that a licensed person be the person conducting the informed consent process. So, me being a CMA, they don't consider that a license. So, although I was trained to conduct the informed consent process on my nearly 10 years as a clinical research coordinator, we did have 2 trials that I was unable to do the informed consent process because the sponsor required a licensed person. I do know one was related to a thyroid cancer study, and I can't remember the conditions of the indication of the other one, but I do know it was 2. So we also need to make sure that stipulation is written into the protocol that they only want licensed people. Despite a person's previous training, we need to make sure they have a current medical license. So they can't just be a doctor, but their license is no longer active. It has to be a current license in place for them to complete the informed consent process. So we don't want to coerce them. We want to make sure that they have an ICF in their native language. So if the person speaks and only understands English or French or Mandarin, their ICF must be in their language. In addition to the approved ICF in their language, the IRB must not only file the approval for the ISF from the IRB, but the site must also file the translation approval for the ISF. So whatever the native language is to where that study is being conducted, the ISF is going to come in that language. But if they have patient populations that speak another language and that ICF is approved, you need to not only file the IRB approval for the ICF in that separate language, you need to make sure you also file that translation approval as well. Make sure we give the patient time and make sure the patient know that they can withdraw the study at any time. There are some cases where the patient withdraws from treatment, but do not withdraw from study. So make sure if you're a study coordinator, you specify what they have withdrawn from. Because if they withdrawn from the medication, you can continue to bring them in for the subsequent visits, but they won't be taking any more medicine. So basically, the IRB has allowed this to happen so the sponsor can collect as much data as possible as it relates to changes in concomitant meds, changes in lab values, and whether or not the patient had adverse events or serious adverse events from the time in which they were going to be in the trial. So again, if they withdraw, make sure you specify withdraw from treatment or withdraw from the trial. Also, they like for us to indicate why. So if they give you why, document why. If it's because, the study became too bothersome, or they didn't like the way the medication made them feel, or it was too many visits, whatever the situation is, make sure you document that as well. Now, they don't have to give you a reason. They can just withdraw and that'll be the end. But if you can get a reason out of them, you want to document that reason as well. Okay. So this is the opportunity for you guys to ask any questions, and then we will close out.
So in the beginning, you were while you were showing the acronyms in the clinical research, there was one thing called letter of interest. What is that letter of interest, Dr. Hood?
Okay, so a letter of interest is basically a sponsor or CRO has typically worked with the site in the past and they know they have a study coming up. And so they just want to get a feel who might be interested in participating. So they'll shoot that letter of interest to that principal investigator in an email and is a brief summary of the trial. Hey, we got this diabetes trial, is this type of drug is in this class, the duration is 2 years, do you want to participate? And if that principal investigator wants to participate, they will sign that letter of interest and they will send it back. So that's typically all it is to a letter of interest.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other acronyms? Because we got time. I'm here as long as you all want to be here. Any other acronyms you all want to go over? And since you asked that question, I can say usually what comes next after letter of interest is the confidentiality disclosure agreement. So basically, when they're getting a little closer to finalizing the protocol, they're going to reach out to the investigators to go ahead and sign this confidentiality agreement. Now, if the PI owns their organization, then that agreement is going to be between the sponsor and that PI. If the PI works for a company or academic setting, then that confidentiality disclosure is going to be between the sponsor, the PI, and that organization. So I came from an academic setting, clinical environment, research environment. So our confidentiality agreements always had to go through the legal team of the company. And then you'll do what's called the site will do what's called a feasibility questionnaire. And that's basically a document asking them, okay, how many patients do you feel like you can recruit? Of those patients you feel like you recruit, how many patients, what's your screening to randomization ratio? So if you screen 20, what percentage of those 20 do you think will screen fail? How many staff members do you have? How many, and that can be included sub-Is and study coordinators. Will your contract process and IRB approval process, can it run concurrently or does one have to go before the other? So those are the kind of questions are typically in the feasibility questionnaire. And once all of this has been done and the IRB approval process has been done, no, qualification visits go before IRB approval. So they're kind of in that startup where you just do a brief overview of the study with the PI and maybe one other person. You take a tour of the site to see if the facility can actually conduct this trial. You give your opinion on whether the site is a good candidate to conduct this trial. And then these visits take place once all of that have been approved. Any other questions?
What is the booster visit?
Okay, so a booster visit is not a mandatory visit in your monitoring plan. So as a CRA, this is our what we call protocols. This is what we have to follow. And the booster visit is only required if you have a site that's not enrolling. And so you want to go to that site and speak to that PI to figure out what their barriers are. Is it the inclusion and exclusion criteria? Or the patients have transportation issues getting to the site? Are patients complaining the compensation is not enough? Whatever is keeping them from enrolling subjects, you have that discussion with that principal investigator. And this can be on site or remote. Another reason to do a booster visit and it'll be a visit outside the guidelines of how often you should go to the site. So typically these have to be approved by who's above the CRA. you could also go if the site has a lot of quality issues. So if they're making a lot of mistakes, you can speak to that clinical trial manager or that clinical trial operator that's above the CRA and say, hey, I know my monitoring plan say I need to go to this site every 6 weeks. They're making a lot of mistakes, and I feel like they would benefit if I go maybe twice within those 6 weeks to do some retraining to make sure that they got a clear understanding of the protocol. And so those visits are called booster visits.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So if that's all, folks, that concludes our presentation. I'm going to stop sharing and